It started with a haystack and ended with handcuffs. But let me back up a bit. My name's Kellan Jameson. I'm a third-generation farmer who inherited my granddad's old property on the edge of Willow Creek Estates, a neighborhood that used to be mostly rural until city sprawl ate up the fields and replaced them with pastel houses and retirees with too much time. My lot's grandfathered in, which means it technically doesn't follow all the HOA rules. But don't tell that to Evelyn Lambert, the HOA president and part-time arsonist, apparently. Evelyn is exactly who you think she is, 50-something, short platinum bob, sunglasses that never leave her face, and a voice that could make coffee curdle. She walks around with a clipboard like it's a badge of honor. She's the kind of woman who complains about the color of your mulch, the angle of your garden gnome, and once threatened to fine my neighbor's kid for drawing chalk on their own driveway. Now, I don't exactly fit the Willow Creek mold. I've got a beard, a pickup, and I still keep a few animals out back: goats, mostly a couple hens, and one surly rescue donkey named Ed. I also keep a haystack on my land, mostly for the goats, but it's also a bit of a nod to my family's history. Evelyn hated that haystack like it personally offended her. "You're bringing down the property values," she once snapped over the fence, clutching that clipboard like it was a holy text. "This isn't a barnyard, Kellan. It's not in your jurisdiction, Evelyn. My land isn't covered by HOA covenants. Been that way since 1973. You can check the county records." "I don't need to check anything. I am the HOA." That was her reply. Not "I represent" or "I speak on behalf of." No. "I am the HOA." She actually said that. I laughed in her face. That didn't go over well. Over the next few weeks, I started getting random code violation notices taped to my mailbox. They were laughable, unauthorized rural decor, odor complaints from the goats, presumably, and one that just said, "Visually disruptive haystack." I ignored them. Like I said, legally she had no standing over my property. But Evelyn doesn't like to be ignored. So one Friday evening, after a long shift at the co-op, I came home to find the fire department outside my house and half my haystack in charred pieces. The fire chief was already walking toward me. "You the homeowner?" he asked. "We got a call from a neighbor about visible flames. Someone lit this thing up about 20 minutes ago." "Someone lit it on purpose?" I asked, jaw tightening. "There's no lightning, no electrical source, and no kids around." "Yeah, this was arson." I looked over at the smoldering ruins of what used to be my haystack. The goats were huddled near the fence, clearly spooked. Ed brayed like he'd seen a ghost. And then I saw her, Evelyn, standing across the street beside her perfectly trimmed hedge, sipping wine like she was watching a fireworks show. When she noticed me staring, she raised her glass. I wanted to storm over there and tell her exactly what I thought, but I had something better. See, I'm not stupid. I've dealt with Evelyn long enough to know she wasn't just annoying, she was obsessed. So a few months back, I installed a few discrete smoke sensors around the outer edge of my property. Not the kind that beep when you burn toast. These were smart sensors linked to my home system. They picked up smoke, recorded timestamps, and, critically, triggered my security cameras to start rolling. I didn't say anything to the fire chief right then. I just nodded, thanked him, and told him I'd be reviewing my footage. Once they left, I went inside, fed the goats, and pulled up the recordings. Sure enough, at exactly 6:42 p.m., the northeast camera caught movement. A figure in a beige sun hat, floral blouse, and khakis approached the haystack. She looked around, then pulled something from her handbag. A long lighter. She lit the bottom edge, stood there for a second watching it catch, then turned and walked away. Clear as day. Her face wasn't visible on that camera, but the next one caught her walking past the south gate, no hat, full profile, and a smug little bounce in her step. I saved the video, copied it 3 times, and backed it up on a cloud drive. Then I called my cousin Trevor, who works for the county sheriff's office. "Hey, Trev," I said. "You remember that HOA president I told you about?" Evelyn Lambert. The clipboard lady? Yeah. She just lit my haystack on fire. He didn't even hesitate. You got proof? Crystal clear. I'll get a deputy out there tonight. Don't say anything to her yet. But I wasn't the only one who saw the fire. Word had already spread through the neighborhood. The next morning, people started stopping by, some pretending they were just out for a walk, others openly curious. You think it was kids? Asked old Mr. Dunley from 2 doors down. Not unless the kids wear designer perfume and carry Chardonnay, I said. Word must have gotten back to Evelyn, because by noon she was back at my gate, arms crossed and looking entirely too proud of herself. Still playing farmer, I see, she said. Still playing dictator?
She sniffed.
If you just removed the haystack like I asked, none of this would have happened. I blinked. You just admitted to it. She didn't even flinch. Oh, please, you can't prove anything. It's not like I left a signature in the ashes. I smiled. No, but you left your face on camera. That wiped the grin off hers. You're bluffing. Am I? Wouldn't be the first time I had to run security footage. You think I don't protect my property when I've got people like you wandering around? She looked rattled now, eyes darting to the street like she was checking for witnesses. You're going to regret this, Kellan, she hissed.
No, Evelyn.
The only thing I regret is not reporting you sooner. An hour later, the sheriff's deputy showed up. I handed over the footage, complete with timestamps, sync sensor data, and a downloaded copy on a flash drive. He watched it right there in his cruiser. Wow, he muttered. She really just lit it and walked away. Yep. He shook his head. This is felony arson, Kellan.
You know that, right?
I nodded. I figured. All right, he said, standing. We'll take it from here. But if she shows up again, call me directly. As he drove off, I looked back toward Evelyn's house. She was watching from behind her blinds, pale as a ghost. Better get used to bars instead of blinds, Evelyn. You messed with the wrong haystack. The morning after Evelyn's little arson performance, I stepped outside with a coffee cup that still had soot clinging to its rim from yesterday's smoke. The scorched earth where the haystack used to sit was now cordoned off with bright orange tape, courtesy of the sheriff's department. Ed the donkey stood behind the fence eyeing the tape like it might attack him. The goats were quieter than usual, nervous from the smoke and disruption. I couldn't blame them. What surprised me was how quickly news traveled. By the time I reached the feed store later that afternoon, 3 customers and the assistant manager had already heard about some HOA lady trying to torch a farmer's land. I hadn't said a word publicly, but the story had legs. People love knowing someone finally stood up to the queen bee of Willow Creek Estates. The deputy, a guy named Ramirez, called me just after lunch. We served the warrant and brought her in this morning, he said. She's being processed now. You available tomorrow morning to come down and give an official statement? Absolutely. She lawyered up immediately. Some big-shot attorney from the city. Just be prepared, this'll get dragged out. That's fine. I've got time. She's the one who lit a match. No argument here. He hung up, and I stared out at the property line. Evelyn's house sat silent and still, blinds drawn tight. Her usual routine sweeping the walkway twice a day, yelling at kids for riding bikes near her driveway had come to a screeching halt. But she wasn't the only one rattled. Later that evening, a knock came at my door. When I opened it, I found a man in his 60s with a clipboard, not the HOA kind, a real one, with legal forms clipped to the top. He wore a faded polo, wire-frame glasses, and had a calm, deliberate way of standing that made him look like someone used to being ignored until he spoke. You Kellan? He asked. I am. He handed me a card. Michael Darden. I'm with the County Zoning and Records Office. Mind if I ask you a few questions? Is this about the fire? Not directly. We've had a request for emergency reassessment of land use designations in this district. Your property's at the center of it. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. What kind of request? He flipped a page. Filed by Willow Creek HOA. 3 days ago. They're petitioning to reclassify the buffer zone that separates HOA-controlled property from non-HOA parcels. If that passes, your lot could fall under their jurisdiction. I stared at him. They're trying to force me into the HOA after someone from the HOA committed arson on my land? I didn't say it made sense. He adjusted his glasses. I'm here because your lot has a unique designation. Legacy agricultural status, pre-incorporation. If that's accurate, and I believe it is, it'd take a court order and a state-level override to change it. But the request triggered an automatic review. Who signed the petition? Evelyn Lambert. She filed it 6 hours before the fire was reported. I laughed, not the amused kind, the kind you let out when things stop being surprising and start becoming ridiculous. So she tried to get legal control over my land, and when that didn't work fast enough, she lit it up? He didn't answer that. Probably wasn't allowed to. I need a copy of everything she submitted, I said. I figured you'd say that. He handed me a folder. That night, I went through every page she'd filed. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, misquoted zoning laws, outdated maps with my property shaded in red like a threat, and a claim that I was actively endangering community safety by maintaining combustible structures near residential homes. She was laying a legal foundation to make me look like a hazard. And then she committed arson herself. The next morning, I gave my full statement at the sheriff's office. Ramirez had already seen the footage, but now an investigator from the fire marshal's office sat in, too. He asked detailed questions about the layout of my property, whether I'd had issues with Evelyn before, and if I'd noticed anything unusual leading up to the fire. When I mentioned the zoning request, his eyebrows lifted. That's no coincidence, he said. We've handled cases like this before. Someone wants control. The system moves too slow, so they take matters into their own hands. Is this going to court? Oh, it already is. Her attorney tried to get her released on her own recognizance this morning. Judge denied it, said she's a potential danger to neighbors. I left the sheriff's office with a copy of my statement and a heads up that reporters might start sniffing around. Apparently, once word got out that an HOA president was arrested for arson over a haystack, it made for pretty juicy headlines. By Friday, the headlines were everywhere. Suburban HOA president arrested for arson in land dispute. Haystack fire sparks legal firestorm in Willow Creek. Neighborhood tyrant sets blaze, gets burned. The last one made me laugh. I clipped it and stuck it on the fridge. Some residents started distancing themselves from her immediately. A couple approached me while I was repairing the fence near the south side. We had no idea she was going that far, said a woman in a sun hat. She told us you were dumping garbage back here. That's why we signed the petition. Garbage? That's hay. For the animals. She said it was infested. She said you were attracting rodents. She's been lying to you. They looked embarrassed, but not surprised. Others, though, tried to defend her. A guy named Curtis, who'd been Evelyn's lapdog for years, marched up and tried to act tough. You really gonna throw her under the bus like this? She's done more for this neighborhood than anyone. She broke the law. She endangered animals. She tried to lie her way into controlling property that isn't hers.
Curtis shook his head.
You could have just removed the haystack. None of this would have happened. I didn't respond. I just pointed to the security camera mounted to the corner of my shed. He walked away without another word. By Sunday, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Since Evelyn was in jail awaiting formal charges, the vice president, an exhausted-looking man named Duncan, stepped in. They tried to keep it private. Closed doors, no residents. But someone live-streamed it. I saw it on a neighborhood Facebook group later that afternoon. Duncan looked like a man trying to hold back a tidal wave with a beach umbrella. We are deeply disturbed by the allegations against Ms. Lambert, he said. Effective immediately, She is suspended from all HOA duties pending the outcome of her legal case. Someone in the back yelled. She tried to burn a guy's land down. Suspend her? She should be banned. Another voice chimed in. She lied to us. She said Kellan was building a bonfire pit for parties. Duncan held up his hands. We are beginning a full review of all actions taken under Ms. Lambert's leadership. That includes the zoning petition. That was good news. But I wasn't about to let this fade quietly into a bureaucratic shuffle. On Monday, I filed a civil suit. Arson was already a criminal matter, but I wanted damages. For the destroyed hay, for the stress, for the impact on my animals. And I had receipts, veterinary reports showing stress-induced health issues in the goats, invoices for replacing fencing that melted from the heat, soil testing to ensure no chemical residues lingered. I hired an attorney who specialized in property rights cases. She was thrilled. HOAs hate going to court, she told me. They're used to bullying people into compliance with fines and threats. But once they're under legal scrutiny, they fold fast. The lawsuit named Evelyn personally and the HOA board as co-defendants, citing negligence in oversight and misuse of authority. That's when things really started unraveling. Turns out Evelyn hadn't just gone rogue. She'd been using HOA funds dues paid by residents for personal errands. Dry cleaning, expensive lunches, and most notably, the legal fees attached to filing the zoning petition. Once that detail surfaced, the board had no choice but to act. Duncan came to my property personally. We're sorry, he said, hands in his pockets. We should have seen what she was doing sooner. You had chances, I said. Plenty of people did. Nobody said anything. He nodded. You're right. I'm not dropping the suit. I didn't ask you to. As he turned to leave, I called out. Clean house, Duncan. Or next time, the whole HOA burns itself down. He didn't argue. By the end of the week, 3 board members resigned. Evelyn was denied bail and scheduled for a preliminary hearing. And me? I got a call from the local paper asking if I'd be willing to do an interview. I agreed. Not because I wanted to gloat, but because people needed to know what happened when you push too far, lie too often, and think authority gives you immunity. It doesn't. Sometimes it just gives you a front-row seat to your own downfall. 2 weeks after Evelyn was denied bail, the atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates shifted like fog lifting after a storm. Her once dominant presence had evaporated, leaving behind a vacuum and a mix of confusion, fear, and quiet satisfaction among the residents. For the first time in years, people walked their dogs without giving sideways glances at each other's trim lines or mailbox colors. The clipboard patrols had stopped. No more unsolicited notices. But the calm was uneasy, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I spent most of my time focusing on the animals. The goats had finally stopped pacing the fence line, and Ed had gone back to his usual routine of braying at squirrels. But I wasn't able to settle. Something about the way Evelyn had prepped that zoning petition and timed the fire left me with a pit in my stomach. She'd been too prepared, too confident. And for someone who always operated with plausible deniability, she'd made a reckless move. That kind of boldness doesn't come from desperation. It comes from backing. I started digging. I requested public copies of the HOA's financial records. Under the state's nonprofit transparency laws, any dues-funded organization is required to make their ledgers and meeting minutes available upon request. They stalled, of course. Claimed files were being organized. But my attorney, Marissa, drafted a formal demand letter, and within 3 days, I had a manila envelope handed to me by a board member I'd never seen before. I spent 2 nights going over everything with a highlighter and a legal pad. There were a few red flags, like a landscaping invoice from a company that didn't exist in county records, and a recurring monthly payment marked administrative consulting that went back almost a year. But one line item stood out: a 5-figure wire transfer to a private security firm in a neighboring city. The reason cited was compliance enforcement consultation. That didn't sit right. I called Trevor, my cousin with the sheriff's office, and asked if he'd ever heard of the firm. He said he hadn't, but he'd check with a contact in the state regulatory office. 2 days later, I got a call. Yeah, so that company? Valor Risk Management? It's not licensed as a security contractor in this state. It's not licensed as anything at all. It's a ghost. So where's the money going? Hard to say, without a subpoena. But here's the kicker. One of the founding members of that firm is a guy named Curtis Rayburn. I knew that name. Curtis. Evelyn's shadow. The guy who'd tried to defend her after the fire. Curtis set up a fake company and Evelyn funneled HOA money into it. That's what it looks like. And if that's true, we're not just talking about embezzlement. That's wire fraud, possibly conspiracy. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called Marissa. She didn't hesitate. We expand the civil suit. Add misappropriation of funds, fraudulent disbursement, and breach of fiduciary duty. If Curtis is involved, he goes in too. That afternoon, I printed out every transaction and delivered a copy to the sheriff's office. It took less than a week for a financial crimes unit to get involved. They started pulling bank records and issuing subpoenas. Meanwhile, the neighborhood started waking up. A woman named Dana, who lived 3 doors down from Evelyn, knocked on my door with a binder full of emails. She'd served on the HOA board 2 years ago, before resigning over what she called unethical leadership. I invited her in. I thought she was just manipulative, Dana said, flipping to a chain of emails where Evelyn had pushed for retroactive fines on a neighbor who painted their porch without permission. Turns out, she was laundering money through the HOA. Did you know about the security company? She nodded slowly. That's why I left. She said she needed off-the-books enforcement to handle non-compliant residents. I told her that sounded illegal. She told me I didn't understand how modern HOA governance worked. She paid Curtis. I figured. He was always around during meetings but never said anything. Just took notes. I assumed he was her assistant. Marissa took Dana's statements and added them to the legal filing. We were now up to 5 named defendants: Evelyn, Curtis, and 3 remaining board members who had signed off on the disbursements. Duncan, the interim president, wasn't among them. He'd been left off most transactions and had apparently been kept in the dark. But the house of cards was collapsing fast. The county prosecutor held a press conference the following week. Cameras clicked and reporters leaned forward as he laid it all out. In addition to the arson charges already filed against Evelyn Lambert, our office is formally charging her with wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. We are also pursuing charges against Curtis Rayburn and other individuals involved in the misappropriation of HOA funds. These are serious offenses, and we intend to prosecute them fully. The community's reaction was immediate. Lawn signs that had once read, "Willow Creek HOA Proud Member," were quietly pulled down. A dozen residents formed an independent committee to audit the remaining leadership. And for the first time, people started talking to one another not just about property lines or shrub heights, but about how they'd all been duped. I got more visitors in 1 week than I had in the past 5 years. An older man named Lloyd told me Evelyn had fined him twice for planting native grasses. A couple who'd moved in last year said Evelyn threatened to block their welcome packet unless they agreed to pay an easement fee. That didn't exist. A single mother showed me photos of her cracked fence, the result of Curtis backing his truck into it during a compliance visit, and how the HOA refused to cover repairs. Each story added weight to the lawsuit. Each person brought receipts. And each one walked away with a new understanding of what had really been happening under Evelyn's rule. But then came the twist no one expected. The fire marshal's office completed their analysis of the Haystack fire, and something didn't add up. The heat signatures indicated the fire had accelerated unnaturally fast. Too fast for just dry hay and a lighter. They ran chemical tests and found traces of an industrial accelerant, one not available over the counter. The only local distributor of that chemical? A pest control company in the next county. The buyer? Valor Risk Management. That meant the fire wasn't just a heat-of-the-moment act. It was calculated,
Planned.
and executed with a third-party chemical. That bumped the charge from felony arson to aggravated arson with intent to destroy property and endanger life. Because my house had been less than 50 feet from the blaze. That changed everything. Marissa met with the district attorney. The state filed a motion to add a charge of attempted reckless endangerment. If a jury agreed Evelyn intended to damage more than just the haystack, she could be looking at over 20 years in prison. Curtis was arrested 2 days later. The footage showed him delivering something to Evelyn's garage the night before the fire. Investigators found the same chemical traces on his truck bed liner. He tried to claim he was just dropping off supplies, but nobody believed him. The trial date was set for early fall. As preparations ramped up, I was approached by a producer from a documentary series about abuses of power in suburban communities. At first, I wasn't interested. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about every person who'd ever been bullied by a self-appointed authority figure hiding behind fine print and bylaws. They filmed interviews with me, Dana, Lloyd, and several others. The episode would air after the trial concluded. They promised anonymity if we wanted it. None of us did. We wanted people to hear the truth. On the day jury selection began, I stood outside the courthouse in a clean flannel shirt and jeans. Marissa handed me a folder of exhibits and nodded. This is going to get ugly. I'm ready. Inside, Evelyn sat at the defense table, face pale, hair pulled back.
No sunglasses. No clipboard.
Just silence. For the first time since she stepped foot on my property, she looked small. And I realized something. She hadn't just underestimated me. She'd underestimated everyone. Because when people stop being afraid of clipboards and fine print, they start fighting back. And once you light that match, there's no unlighting it. The courtroom was cooler than I expected. Not in temperature, just in tone. It didn't feel like a place for justice. It felt sterile, hollow. But that changed the moment the bailiff called the case number, and everyone stood. I glanced at Evelyn, seated beside her defense attorney, and saw something new on her face, not just fear, but disbelief. Like she still couldn't fathom that anyone would hold her accountable. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel, wasted no time. Opening statements. Prosecution first. The assistant district attorney stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the center of the room with calm precision. He began with a timeline. Not of the fire, but of Evelyn's actions over the past year, how she orchestrated the zoning petition, created financial trails that led to a fake company, and ultimately used an accelerant to destroy private property in a deliberate attempt to claim control over land she had no legal authority over. He paused only once to hold up a still frame for my security footage. Evelyn, lighter in hand, the tip of the flame just inches from the hay. The defense tried to steer the narrative toward character. That Evelyn had been under stress, that she was concerned for community safety, and that her actions were misguided but not malicious. Her attorney spun phrases like community preservation and miscommunication. The judge didn't blink.
I was called to the stand on the second day.
I spoke clearly and directly, walking them through the layout of my property, the history of its zoning status, and the exact sequence of events on the night of the fire. When the prosecutor asked about my smoke sensor system, I explained how it was triggered automatically and how the footage was captured from 2 angles. "Why did you install those sensors in the first place?" he asked. "Because I didn't trust the HOA," I said. And I was right. The defense attorney leaned on the podium and tried to rattle me. "You have a history of resisting neighborhood standards, don't you?" "I have a history of minding my own business and protecting what's mine." "You've ignored multiple requests to conform to HOA guidelines." "My property isn't subject to those guidelines." That's been upheld by the county every time they tried. He paced a little, flipping through papers. Would you say you dislike Ms. Lambert? I'd say I know exactly who she is. And who is that? Someone who sets fires to get what she wants. That line landed hard. Even the jurors shifted.
Dana testified right after me.
She brought her binder, the emails, the resignation letter she'd written when Evelyn first started pushing for off-the-books enforcement. She was calm but firm, pointing out where Evelyn had manipulated board votes and quietly funneled money into Curtis's ghost company. Then came the bombshell, a forensic accountant from the state's financial crimes unit. He stepped up and laid out everything in black and white. Wire transfers, bank accounts, the fake invoices, even the chemical purchase that linked Curtis directly to the accelerant used in the fire. The jury didn't need convincing. They just needed time. But we weren't done. When Curtis took the stand, he tried to play dumb. Said he wasn't aware of what the money was for, that he'd just handled errands for Evelyn. But then the prosecutor dropped the final piece, a recorded call from jail. Evelyn had called Curtis 2 days after her arrest, and the line had been monitored. She told him to make sure the files are gone and keep your mouth shut about the deliveries. That was enough. The judge recessed for deliberation, and we waited. It didn't take long. By late afternoon, the jury filed back in. Their faces were drawn but certain. On the charge of aggravated arson, we find the defendant, Evelyn Lambert, guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, guilty. On the charge of criminal conspiracy, guilty. The list went on. Every charge, a guilty verdict. Curtis got his own day in court 2 weeks later and didn't fare any better. Evelyn was sentenced to 19 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 12. Curtis got 12, no parole for at least 8. The remaining board members who had signed off on illegal disbursements were fined and banned from serving in any HOA or nonprofit leadership roles for life. But that wasn't the end. The county stepped in and dissolved the Willow Creek Estates HOA entirely. Turns out, when the leadership is convicted of criminal conspiracy and financial fraud, the organization loses its charter. Residents were given the opportunity to vote on restructuring under new bylaws, but most declined. They were tired of governance, tired of fear. I didn't expect what came next. Letters.
Dozens of them.
Handwritten notes slipped into my mailbox, left on my porch, taped to my shed. People saying thank you, not just for standing up to Evelyn, but for showing them they weren't powerless. One of them was from a teenager, probably 16 or 17. Said his parents had been fined for letting him park his bike in the front yard. Said he always thought the rules were set in stone, and that people like me were just loud for the sake of it. He ended his note with, "You were right. She was wrong. Thanks for showing us." I kept that one. A week after the final sentencing, I rebuilt the Haystack. Not because I needed it, though the goats appreciated it, but because it felt right. Like reclaiming something. Duncan, the former interim president, stopped by while I was stacking the final bales. "I've been thinking about what she did," he said. "All the little manipulations. The way she made people feel like they didn't have a choice." "She was counting on silence," I said. "She almost got it." "Almost." He nodded and looked out at the property line. "County says they're putting up a permanent zoning marker. You'll be officially designated as Legacy AG land. No more loopholes." That's good. Better late than never. A few weeks later, the documentary aired. I watched it once, sitting on the porch with Ed chewing grass beside me and the goats lying in the shade. The footage cut between courtroom scenes, interview segments, and overhead shots of Willow Creek backyards, sidewalks, and empty clubhouse chairs. It ended with a shot of the rebuilt Haystack, golden in the evening light. I didn't expect much after that. But the story spread. Other neighborhoods started having their own conversations. I got emails from people in other states asking how to install smoke sensors, how to access public records, how to challenge shady HOA rules. Some folks even asked if I'd consider starting a podcast. I didn't. I'm not a broadcaster. I'm a guy with animals and a stubborn streak. But I told him the same thing I told myself the night I watched Evelyn raise that wine glass across the street. You don't win by yelling louder. You win by being ready, by knowing the law, by installing cameras and keeping records and refusing to be pushed around. Evelyn thought she was unstoppable. Turns out, she was just one match away from collapse.
And now?
The neighborhood is quieter. Not just in noise, but in tension. People wave when they pass. Kids draw on sidewalks again. No clipboards, no notices, no petty fines. Just neighbors. And a haystack that stands taller than ever.